For 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days, Isla Vance had not spoken a single word. Not to the speech therapists her father had flown in from 4 countries. Not to the neurologists at the 2 research hospitals where she had spent a combined 19 weeks as a patient. Not to the tutors, the behavioral specialists, the child psychologists, or the occupational therapists who had cycled through the east wing of her father's property in a procession so continuous that the housekeeper had stopped learning their names. She was 8 years old, and she communicated through a tablet, through gesture, through the particular intelligence of her eyes, which missed nothing and offered nothing back that she had not decided to offer. On a Thursday morning in October, in the backyard of a house on Clement Street that needed a new coat of paint, she said her first word in 3 years, 2 months, and 11 days to a man she had known for 40 minutes. The word was 1 syllable. It landed in the yard the way a stone lands in still water, not loudly, but with a consequence that spread outward in every direction, and did not stop. The man she said it to set down the tool he was holding, and did not pick it up again. Ben Rafferty was 41 years old and worked as a physical therapist out of a converted sunroom at the back of the house on Clement Street, which he had been renting for 3 years since the divorce, which had been since his daughter Meg was 4, which made Meg 7 now, and the reason the sunroom had an aquarium he had built himself from reclaimed glass panels, because Meg had decided fish were calming, and she had been correct. The sunroom served 3 regular clients per week, a retired teacher recovering from a knee replacement, a teenager with a sports injury, and an 8-year-old girl referred by a developmental pediatrician on the other side of the city who had run out of conventional options and had written Ben's name on a referral slip with the specific, unelaborated handwriting of someone doing the last thing they could think of. Ben had a PT license, a wall of continuing education certificates, and a way of working that other therapists described as intuitive, and that Ben would have described, if pressed, as paying attention to what was actually in front of him rather than to the chart. He drove a 2010 Honda CR-V with a cracked side mirror and a back seat permanently configured for Meg, who came with him on Saturdays, because Saturdays were his days, and he did not subdivide them. He had $8,400 outstanding on a second-hand therapy table he had financed 16 months ago, with 62 days remaining on the payment window before the financing company's penalty clause activated. And he had been taking every referral that came through, which was how a developmental pediatrician's referral slip had become. 3 weeks later, a first appointment on a Thursday morning. Edward Vance had built his money in logistics infrastructure, systems that moved other people's products from one place to another. 22 years of not stopping until things worked. He was 54, with a company valued at $9 billion and a procession of specialists who had not given him the one thing he had spent 3 years and more money than he had tracked trying to obtain: the sound of his daughter's voice. Ila's mother had died when Ila was 4, the year before Ila stopped speaking. Edward did not draw a line between those 2 facts publicly. He drew it privately every day. It lived in his upper chest, just below the collarbone, where grief settles when it has found its permanent address. He came to every appointment himself, because he had decided in the first month of Ila's silence that there was no appointment he would not attend in person, because she needed to see him there. He sat in a chair in the corner of the sunroom. He watched. Ben had read the referral notes, not the way a clinician reads a chart, categorizing and flagging, but the way he read everything about a new patient, understand what had already been tried, then set it down. The list of things that had already failed was a map of where not to go, not where to go next. He set up the sunroom for Isla specifically, the aquarium lit, 2 low chairs, a bin of wooden hand puzzles he had bought, because the grain was interesting, and he had a hypothesis about texture. He had asked Meg what she would want in a room she was going into for the first time. Meg had said something that smelled good. The pot of rosemary had been on the windowsill for months. Meg declared it sufficient. Isla came in with Edward and looked at the room before she looked at Ben, which was what Ben had expected, and had arranged the room to accommodate. She looked at the aquarium for a moment. 3 fish, a piece of driftwood, a cluster of live plants in the corner of the tank, and something in her face registered the aquarium in the way a face registers something it did not expect to be interested in. Then she looked at Ben. He said, "The one hiding behind the driftwood is named Gerald. He's been hiding back there for 2 weeks, and I'm choosing to respect his decision." He said it to the room, not specifically to Isla, the way you might mention something to yourself that someone nearby might happen to hear. He did not look at her when he said it. He looked at the aquarium. Isla looked at the aquarium. She looked at Gerald. She looked at Ben. He picked up one of the wooden hand puzzles from the bin and sat down in one of the low chairs and began working it with one hand, not as a demonstration, simply as something to do. After a moment, Isla sat in the other chair, not because she had been invited to, because she had decided to. Edward watched from the corner and did not move. The session lasted 50 minutes. Ben and Isla did not interact in any way that would have looked, from outside the room, like therapy. They sat near each other. They worked with the wooden materials from the bin. Ben narrated occasional observations about Gerald, who had moved 2 inches but remained technically behind the driftwood. At the 30-minute mark, Isla picked up a puzzle piece and placed it in the correct position without looking at the puzzle, which meant she had understood the structure from touch alone, and Ben set his own puzzle piece down and did not pick it up again, which was the only response he gave. At 45 minutes, he asked her, looking at the aquarium, whether she thought Gerald was shy or just preferred his own company. He asked it the way he asked most things, without pressure in the voice, without an implied answer. The way you ask a question when you are genuinely uncertain and the other person might know something you don't. Isla looked at Ben for a long moment. Then she looked at Gerald. She said, "Both." The word came out at the volume of something that had not been used in a long time. It had the quality of a voice finding its shape again, slightly uncertain of the instrument but certain of the content. Both. 1 syllable. The rosemary on the windowsill. The 3 fish in the tank. Gerald, 2 inches from where he had been. Ben set down the thing he was holding. He did not look at Edward. He looked at the aquarium and said, very quietly, "Yeah, I think you're right." In the corner of the sunroom, Edward Vance put one hand over his mouth. He did not make a sound. His other hand gripped the arm of the chair, and his knuckles went pale, and he breathed very carefully through his nose, and his eyes did not close, and the tears went down his face without any performance around them, and Ben did not turn around, and Isla did not turn around, and the room held what had happened in it, without announcing what it was. Meg arrived at 11:30, which was when Ben's next client was scheduled, and when Meg was dropped from her Saturday morning art class 2 streets over. She came through the back door with paint on her left forearm and a small canvas board under her arm that she was carrying with the careful, important quality of something that had just been finished. She was 7 years old and wore her hair in 2 braids that she had done herself at age 5 and had been doing herself since. She carried in her jacket pocket a small brass button she had found on the floor of the school library 6 months ago and kept because she had decided it was good luck. And she had not yet been given a reason to revise this conclusion. She came into the sunroom and stopped when she saw Isla, and she looked at Isla with the direct, non-performing curiosity of a child who has not yet learned to disguise interest as something more polite. She said, "Is that your dad in the corner? He looks like something happened." Ela looked at Meg. Something moved across her face. Not a smile exactly, more the precursor to one, the facial adjustment of someone who has remembered that something like a smile is available. She looked at Meg's canvas board and pointed at it. Meg held it up. It was a painting of a fish, recognizable as a fish, abstract in execution, painted in a blue so dark it was almost black, with a single streak of orange across the middle that may or may not have been intentional. She said, "It's a fish. His name is Gerald." Ila looked at the painting, and then at the aquarium, and then at Ben, who was looking at the window. She said, "He looks different." 3 words. The second and third time she had spoken in 3 years, 2 months and 11 days. Meg said, "I know. I made him more interesting." She sat down on the floor with the canvas between her knees and looked up at Ila. "Do you want to give him a last name? I've been thinking about it, and I think Gerald needs a last name." In the corner, Edward Vance made a sound that was very small and that he covered immediately with the back of his hand, and no one in the room commented on it. And Meg did not turn around, because Meg had lived with Ben long enough to understand that some sounds in a room required space rather than attention. The threat to Ben's practice was named Arthur Stoley, director of the Community Health Licensing Board that certified independent therapists in the district. 6 weeks before Ila's first session, he had opened a compliance review based on an anonymous complaint that the sunroom did not meet square footage and ventilation requirements. The complaint was filed 2 days after Ben declined a referral partnership with a larger therapy group, whose director had asked him to redirect his private clients in exchange for a monthly fee, an arrangement Ben had refused because it would have forced his clients to pay rates they could not afford. The review carried the possibility of a license suspension, $11,000 in mandatory modifications, 60 days without income, and the penalty clause on his therapy table financing activating. Arthur Stoll had a habit of clicking his pen, not absently, but in a deliberate, rhythmic pattern before he made any statement he considered final, as though the clicking were a gavel he was using to call his own decisions to order. He clicked it 4 times before every significant sentence. When he arrived at the sunroom for the inspection that the compliance review required, he clicked it twice before he said he would need to measure the room, and twice more before he noted the ceiling height, and 4 full times before he said he believed the ventilation would require documentation. Edward Vance was in the corner chair when Arthur arrived. He had been coming to every session for 6 weeks, which was how many sessions there had been. He had said almost nothing during any of them except to Ben, briefly, after each one, about what he had observed, which Ben answered directly and without elaboration. He was a man who had spent 22 years building the systems that move things from one place to another, and he was very good at reading the structure underneath a situation. And the structure underneath Arthur Stoll's compliance review was not complex, and did not require long observation. He stood up. He said, "The complaint that initiated this review." "Who filed it?" Arthur said. "Complaints are filed anonymously by," Edward said. The filing date was April 14th. 2 days after Ben declined a partnership with a group practice, whose director has a personal relationship with your board's deputy chair, which is in the public record as a campaign contribution made in March of this year. He did not raise his voice. He stated the sequence of facts the way he stated all sequences, in order, without decoration. The square footage of this room is 214 square feet. The licensing requirement is 180. The ventilation system was installed and certified 18 months ago. The certification is on file. He looked at Arthur. "The review has no basis. I'd like you to close it today." Arthur's pen clicked once. It did not click again. He looked at the room. He looked at the certification documents that Ben had quietly laid on the therapy table when Arthur arrived. Because Ben had known what was in the files and had prepared them without being asked, which was what Ben did with everything. He read the situation. He prepared. He did not perform the preparation. Arthur looked at Edward. He looked at the pen in his hand. He said, "I'll need to review thee." Edward said, "You have the ventilation certificate. You have the measurements. There's nothing to review." He sat back down in the corner chair. "Close it today." Arthur Stoll left without clicking the pen again. The review was closed by end of business. Ben picked up the wooden puzzle he had set down and turned it over in his hands once and set it back in the bin. He did not say anything to Edward. He did not thank him. He understood that some things are not offers, but simply the correction of errors, and that the correction of an error does not require gratitude any more than a level floor requires thanks for being flat. 1 year later, Isla Vance spoke in full sentences. Not always, not in every room, not to every person, but to Ben, and to Meg, and to her father, in the particular register of a child who chooses her words carefully, because she knows what it costs to spend them, and has decided certain people are worth the spending. Edward came to every session for the full year and sat in the corner chair and watched, and gradually the chair moved, first to the side of the room, then to beside the aquarium, then to beside Isla's chair, where it stayed. Gerald had been joined by 2 more fish, both named by Meg in a ceremony that Isla had supervised with the seriousness the occasion required. Meg finished the Gerald painting series in February, 6 total, each one slightly more accurate than the last, though she maintained the first was still the most honest. She gave the final one to Isla rolled in a paper tube. Isla unrolled it and looked at it for a long time. Then she said, "He looks like himself." Meg said that was the point. Isla said, "I know." She held it against her side for the rest of the afternoon and took it home and did not put it down on the drive, and Edward watched her in the back seat and looked at the road and said nothing. Because some moments are complete exactly as they are. A child does not need the world to be fixed. She needs one room where someone is paying attention, and the patience to let what is inside her find its own way out. If someone gave your child the thing that 3 years of specialists and every dollar you had couldn't give, and all it cost him was 40 minutes and a fish named Gerald, what would you say? Tell us in the comments, because there is no right answer, and we want to hear yours. Share this with someone who needs to be reminded that the most important thing you can give a child is not always the most expensive one. Subscribe. We are here every week. We read every one.